So again, we're talking about not compromising our integrity. And so let's recap up to this point. Number one, compromise is deadly. Number two, regardless of the cost of inducement, stay strong. Number three, when we stand in integrity, the enemy will come and raise the stakes and become enraged. Stand strong. So now let's look at Daniel chapter 3, verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image which I've set up? Now if you're ready at this time, and you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I've made, good. But if you do not worship, you should be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that's the case, our God whom we serve can deliver us from the fiery burning furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up." Now these three young men stood in front of the ruler of the known world at the time. He had unlimited human authority, and he was enraged at these teenagers. He asked insolently, "What God can deliver you from my hand?" Sennacherib asked the same thing of Hezekiah and the people he served in Jerusalem. And the next morning, 185,000 Assyrians were dead on the ground. These days, we hear a lot of nonsense about speaking truth to power. These young men truly did it at the risk of their own lives. Imagine you're standing in front of a Hitler or a Stalin, and they threaten to shoot you immediately if you don't compromise just a little bit. Nebuchadnezzar even gives them a second chance. He likes and respects these guys. Usually conquered people serve in humble roles, but these guys were raised into leadership. Yet they look absolute power in the face and tell them that it is Yahweh, the one true God, that can and will deliver us out of your hands. But even if he chooses not to, we will not serve your idols. Remember my friend Anna, the financial advisor? Now she got up and walked out of that business meeting. Like everyone else though, on the plain of Dura back then in Babylon, everyone else in the room, they took one of those business cards. Let's look at verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times hotter, more than it's usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who was in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into that fiery furnace. Now these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast in the midst of that burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the fire exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Now, since the men of God would not compromise, the enemy tries to retaliate. And verse 19 says the king was full of fury and increased this heat 7-fold. He, in effect, means, we'll see if your God can deliver you out of my hand. So he binds them and sets about to annihilate those who dared not bow their knee to him. Now, pictures left in ruins that they found show that these ovens look like giant milk bottles made out of clay. And they had an open top and an open side, and then they had openings in the bottom where they worked the bellows. And they were working these bellows hard. It was so hot that those who threw them in the furnace died. Now let's look at verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. He arose in haste and spoke to his counselors. Didn't we cast 3 men into the midst of this fire? And they answered, "Yes, king, it is true." "Look," he answered, "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God." Notice the change of his address now. "Come on out here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego comes out of the fiery furnace, and the satraps, administrators, governors, king's counselors gathered together, and they saw that these men on whose bodies the fire had no power, and the hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of the fire had not come upon them. Of course, this is the climax of this account. There are several things we got to see here. First, the enemy was astonished. He pulled out all the stops to eliminate these guys that would not bow down to him, that would not compromise. Amidst the judgment he had declared, they not only were protected, but they are joined by like the Son of God. They are protected and ministered to in this fire. Third, they're set free. Their bonds are destroyed by what was designed to destroy them. Fourth, because they'd honored God and did not compromise, God honored them and wholly set them free from the judgment proclaimed against them. Fifth, the enemy's judgments could not touch them in the smallest ways. The smell of smoke couldn't even attach itself. But most importantly, though, the enemy that railed against God and demanded, "Who is it that's going to deliver you out of my hand?" That same God showed up. And when God joined them in the fire and showed up, he is with those. He showed that he is with those that do not compromise. The enemy confessed the truth then. He calls these servants of the Most High God and sets them free. Nebuchadnezzar remembers his previous confession then, all of a sudden, when Daniel interpreted his dream. He said, this is certainly the Most High God, and now he remembers and repeats it. The faithfulness of these 3 teenagers to God results in the affirmation and praise of God from the lips of the enemy. Don't compromise whatever you do. You don't know who else you will affect besides yourself. Let's go to verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar spoke. "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." This is the enemy. "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God." And this is the enemy speaking. "Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be cut in pieces. Their houses shall be made a heap, and because there's no other God who can deliver like this God." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. God is praised by the enemy. And the death sentence that was pronounced against Yahweh's servants is now pronounced against anyone who blasphemes the one true God. Moreover, God's servants are not just set free, but promoted because they would not compromise, put all their trust, hope, and love in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, my friend Anna, I spoke to you about prior, has one of the biggest and most successful financial advisory firms in this area. She's an author. She's a conference speaker. God has glorified her decision not to compromise. But I will tell you one thing. I wouldn't want to be one of those advisors who took one of those business cards. Not for all the money in the world. No one these days is going to set up an 8-story image in the local park. At least I hope not. Today's idols and the temptations to bow down to them are a lot more subtle. We have electronic everythings. They guide us in our cars. They entertain us. They speak to us and answer our questions. Our personal decisions are without limit, culturally. We can sleep with whoever we want without reproach from other people. And we can kill the product of our indiscretions. There is an absolute freedom to do almost anything we can dream of, but we just can't do it without eternal consequences. Someone wisely wrote this about modern idols. Today's idols are more in the self than on the shelf. Today's three basic biblical rules are these. Every person is serving gods in his or her life. Every person is transformed into an image of the God he or she is serving. And mankind creates and forms a structure of society in its own image. The image of the God that serves. That for which I would give anything and accept nothing in exchange for is the most important thing in my life. Whatever that is the God of my life. Think about the third statement here. Look at American culture. Who does the average American worship today? Is it the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? You know them by the fruit. Especially this God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is seen in the face of Jesus Christ. May God help us. I ask all of us to consider if there is anything that we would love or put ahead of Jesus in any way. What about family? What about work? What about money? What about ministry? Is there anything in competition that is edging close to the place God holds in your hearts? I plead with you all to reflect on the state of your hearts, and if anything is edging close to the supreme place that belongs to Jesus Christ, pray for help and deliverance. Thanks.